right. Good morning. I'm Ty Tyree, the news director for the Tower Coffee Hour, an unofficial news outlet for the Mueller neighborhood in Austin, Texas. Today we're going to talk with our first live interview in our effort to talk with all the candidates for any elected office that has an impact on our neighborhood. That includes city council, county commission, state representatives and senators, and also federal representatives and senators. I've got a question for you. Do you know who those people? Maybe more importantly, do they know you and what you stand for? Today we have a second interview with a candidate for City Council, District 9. Our first was with Ben Loeffler, and you can find it on our podcast, Celebrating Differences. Before we go into the discussion, I'd like you to subscribe to our channel down below and click the bell so you can get all of our interviews live. Okay, let's talk about Tom Wald. I first met Tom many years ago as we were both active in the bicycling community in Austin. At the time, I believe he was executive director of a relatively new nonprofit, Bike Austin. Since then, I have interacted with him on many levels and have always been impressed with his dedicated attention to detail. His analysis of the opportunities for a bikeway aligned with MOPAC was a solid, well-researched and documented paper. His most recent work, pushing the Red Line Initiative, was necessary to get a job done that should have been done years ago by our city and county governments, and we applaud him for that. Tom asked for our endorsement for his candidacy for District 9, but we are choosing not to endorse any candidate until we've had a chance to interview them all. So let's see what District 9 looks like. The first part is this map. You can see District 9, the black line that goes through it, or the pale brown line, dark line that goes through it is I-35. And our neighborhood is that upper right corner that's separated by airport and I-35 from the neighbors around us. District 9 takes in pretty much all of downtown as well. We are bordered on the south and east by District 1, represented by Councilmember Harper Madison, and on the north by District 4, which is represented by a newly elected Councilmember, Chito Vela. We will invite them to talk about what their agendas are and how that impacts our neighborhoods. By the way, Tom has also put up a website. There he is. Tom has his website up so we can see what he has to say at start.timewald.com, Tom Wald, and you'll notice it's fairly limited right now, but there is a donate button, so you've got a chance to go donate for Tom's candidacy. So let's see if we can go talk to Tom. There he is. Tom, how are you? Thanks for agreeing to be interviewed and being flexible on time. I know you have a lot to do, so we'll try to be quick but thorough today.
Yeah, thanks, Ty. And forgive me if I call you Preston from time to
That's
time
fine.
because I've known you for a lot of times by that name. I like the name. So yeah, I'll just get at it. I've been a longtime community leader, primarily focused on active transportation, but also served in my neighborhood association and my planning team, and on the Wheatsville board previously. And it's been just a part of my life, serving the community through nonprofits, through volunteer service on boards. It just comes naturally. And I've been considering running for city council for a lot of time, but it wasn't a given. And I saw what was going on in District 9 and wanted to make sure that we have leadership that has that community experience, because truly, to get things done and to be effective at city council, you need to have incredible roots in the community. You need to have that experience of how to get things done. You're working with government agencies to accomplish things. You're working with community leaders. You're working with the government staff. You're working with private firms, and knowing how all those fit together and what the different motivations are and how to get people on the same page is where action happens. Knowing how to do that is critical, and that was the deciding factor for me entering in. Beyond that, they're just incredibly important issues. If you'd asked me over 20 years ago when I moved to Austin, that we'd be where we are now. That we've just become so popular that our popularity is, I mean, it's hurting us. It's hurting the least among us. It's hurting the middle class. People can no longer, of modest means, can no longer afford to get a place in Central Austin and much of District 9. It's just putting people to the peripheries, whether that's challenging their household budgets, or whether that means they have to move out to the edge of the city, or to Hutto, or to Kyle, which are fine places. But if you have family, if you have connections, if you have jobs here, that's where you want to be, right? And it's truly a crisis. So I'm fully committed to using the tools that the city has to ensure that we can build more housing in Austin. That's going to be market rate. It's also going to be banking up our income restricted units over time. And also, frankly, it's going to be subsidized housing as well for those who don't earn enough to be able to pay any sort of rent, and also need supportive services. On a related note, I believe that we can end homelessness. We need to reinvigorate the 2018 plan, and we need to have a path to ending chronic homelessness in Austin. I believe we can do it. Other places have done it, and we've done it here for veterans. So we have we have the expertise we need here. My background, frankly, has been primarily in transportation, and I am a firm believer in multimodal transportation, so that people have different options to get around, and that they're not limited just by using their car to make even a half mile or a mile trip. And I think that your listeners in Mueller are very aware of that, because I think that pretty much everyone moves to Mueller knowing that that's one of the great things about Mueller. You can walk so easily, sidewalks are everywhere. There are parks. There's lots to walk to. You can walk to the grocery store even, and even the trips you have to make, even if it's via car, it's only a mile and a half to the grocery store. So you're not driving miles and miles. And so that's critically important to me, and it's demonstrated by the work I've done. And I know it's important to people who live in Austin, as polls again and again cite that people want to have more places to walk and bike.
So, Tom, let's talk a little bit about you. Where and when were you born? Where did you grow up? What have you done for education, work, travel that you think we should know about?
Sure. So I grew up in Minneapolis. About half of my life was spent there. And I've spent nearly all of my adult life living in Austin. I moved here in '99. I actually have family here. My father and my stepmother live here in Austin, and they have for years. They moved here previously to me. My background is in this, some people call them sort of the sort of fundamental degrees, in the sense of, I have a background in physics. That's where, I practice my detail oriented and making sure that the little pieces of things get right. Sometimes that's essential. And then also philosophy. But I also have a certificate in nonprofit management, and that's been helpful as well to, because, well, I'll just say that, whether it's running a nonprofit or being a city council member, your job is always multifaceted. Beyond that, I also lived previously briefly on the West Coast. Most of my time in Austin, I've spent living in D9, briefly in South Austin. So I've lived in the West Campus. I lived in a housing co-op. I lived in Judges Hill briefly, and I've worked much in D9 as well.
So the first question that really gets into it is, why are you qualified to be a city council member, and particularly in District 9?
Yeah, so I feel like I'm going to be repeating myself a little bit, but
Yeah.
I have, yeah, no, that's right. I actually, so I moved into Cherrywood in 2005, and have, like I said, incredible roots. I mean, 2005, I was, going over to Mueller and walking up and down the runway. So I've seen Mueller grow. And it's been a great plan, and it's grown into a great thing, and it's continuing to grow. I frankly spent so much time in District 9, even in my hometown of Minneapolis. I grew up in a place not unlike D9. It's very, very close to downtown. It's a long walk to downtown, if that makes sense. There's a lot of transit. There are parks and so on, and so this is, it's a very comfortable place for me, in the sense of, it is home. I've, helped to I've had numerous conversations on mobility with people in District 9 to ensure that the way we're planning out our mobility options is great. Worked with downtown interests, including the Downtown Austin Alliance, a good deal, and I know how those things balance between downtown property owner interest, downtown residents, and then other parts of the community. Um, so I think really just my extensive experience working with different community leaders, and as a community leader, knowing that that's a large part of what city council is working with different community leaders and then coordinating with government staff and then private companies as well. So I've been working toward this without necessarily knowing that this was the exact path I was going to be taking.
Well, and it's, your opening statement covers a lot of the areas you're interested in, but I'd like to drill in a little bit on affordable housing, the aging population, diversity, and transportation. Something that, I mean, you are completely ready to do. So talk about affordable living, because you talked a little bit about co-housing and that kind of thing in West Campus. But this is, something that is so focused on Austin. I'm not, uh, I grew up privileged. I continue to feel like I'm privileged and I've got fairly good income, but it's fixed. I'm on a fixed income. And the taxes in Mueller and in Austin are driving me out.
Yeah, so you touched on a few things there, and I just want to add on a little bit to what I just previously said. I think the other thing that makes me, I guess, qualified is a way to put it, but just really um, important in this race is that I care about these things so much. I have friends in different parts of Austin, different ages, different economic backgrounds, and I know I've just seen friend after friend every month someone has to move from Austin because they can no longer afford it. Um, so these are just incredibly critical issues. They're people are having to choose whether as it goes, they're having to choose whether they can put food on the table or pay rent, or go bankrupt. There's only so many choices. So um, want to touch on all of the things that you said there. So in my background, you know, uh, I could touch on a little bit about House of Commons, where I lived in West Campus. That was an intentional community, and the intent there was to be inclusive. There were actually people from just barely 18 all the way up until their 60s who were living there, creating another option for people. It's not for everyone, but it's certainly creating another option. Um, Getting at property taxes, it's a challenging one to crack because one of the largest portions of our property taxes is devoted to spending at the state level for other school systems, and so it's tough to get around that when that's a state decision. We're not the state legislature, and if we had other taxing tools such as income tax, then property tax would be less of a weight. But that's not something that we can directly affect at the city level. Um, I guess the other thing I would say is that it's I think we should continue to explore tools for how people can address their property taxes when they're living in their home. It's really disruptive to be moving from your home, and so
Mm-hmm.
how can we ensure that people can remain in place where they are? Um, and I want our local tax dollars to be spent as efficiently as possible and to be at high value. But at the same time, it actually is just a small fraction of the total property tax bill. So there's only so much we can do at the city level. I intentionally, I'll add on that when I was invited a few years ago to join the board of People United for Mobility Action, and I immediately, as many of the things that I had on my plate, I could not say no. And the big reason why was because, as with much of the work I do, affordability has always been an important part of my transportation work. That's been a huge motivating factor. If you can cut out that $10,000 a year car, or go from a two-car household down to one car, that saves you tons of money and makes you be able to afford other things more. But in addition, We also need to think about other things related to mobility, other things related to housing, that it's not always about money. And we need to ensure that people feel welcome in the city, whether they, regardless of the color of their skin, their background, or whether they're a recent immigrant. And those, and then economics too. That, I mean, we've already touched on this, but just, how much income, or, how much wealth you have, and just being able to live in our city and enjoy the amenities it has. So those are just critical to me, and it's reflected in my work.
Okay, so one of the areas that I'm interested in, I'll be 80 next year, is the aging population and how we're going to, in Austin, provide for them. Because, we represent a really interesting thing. Most of us are who've come to Austin to be with grandchildren or that kind of thing, uh, have some pretty good backgrounds. We have some knowledge that should be taken advantage of, but nobody wants to talk to me about that at 80 years old. Um, my income is solidly fixed. I mean, it goes up maybe 1.3% a year. Cost of living is going up a little bit faster than in Austin, and the median family income in Austin is going crazy, which is affecting a lot of people, certainly the renters in Austin. So I think let's talk about aging related to housing, but aging also related to services, because as I get older, I'm going to require more services.
Yeah, and you know, as you say, the when you retire, you're typically on a fixed income. I mean, it's hard to imagine what other mechanisms there are, but you're typically on a fixed income, and a lot of our, even our income restricted housing, is tied to the median family income, which continues to rise. And I think it's great that people are making more, in general, are making more incomes, but then how does that affect those rates for rentals and for other housing? So to be frank, am not sure why that has been left as a gap, and I think that that's an important gap to fill, to ensure that is housing that prices are restricted for, let's say, those over 65 or those who are retired, and however we figure out the nuance and the details of that. But I think that's critically important. We shouldn't be leaving people out of affordable housing. As far as the other component of just you know I say the other component, it's really the whole big picture of aging. And it's complicated. And I think one of the key things is, and one of the things I've supported for a long time, are those walkable, bikeable, transit accessible communities, and also complete communities, so that you have the things within walking distance. So my parents live in South Austin. They used to be able to walk to the grocery store just a few blocks away. Now that grocery store is closed because of the economics of it. So when we have, I'll be frank, here's a tie-in. Now there's a 6-story mid-rise apartment complex that's going up just nearby where they live, and my mother's actually, frankly, happy, because she's like, well, that could mean that we have a grocery store again, because the economics will support it. And so these creating more opportunities for people to live in Austin where they can walk to these amenities, because at some point you're not going to be able to drive. Uh, sorry, my girlfriend's father just went to the hospital a few days ago, and he may never be able to drive again. Um, is he, so ensuring that he has medical services that are within walking distance, that he has a place where other places he can go, such there's no real good park within that area. Which is a huge amenity, important when you're retired. I mean, it's important for everyone, but I would just say when you're retired, you want to be able to go places outside of your house that you can walk to. So I think the transportation access, but also the complete communities, is going to be key. And then working with Travis County, especially on our health services, to make sure that we're being more holistic about how we're delivering those health services. That they and you didn't mention this explicitly, but we're going to have the so-called, what do they call it, the gray tsunami, silver tsunami.
Silver
Yeah.
tsunami is one of the terms. Yeah,
Yeah. And I mean,
that's so much
we're
better
gonna.
than gray tsunami, Tom.
Sorry, thanks. I'll be more careful next time.
Yeah.
Yeah, silver tsunami. Yeah. So no, these are important issues to address, and we have Mueller's, the way it's been laid out, has been helpful, but that's it's only one place, and so there are other we need to continue work on that to make sure our community is more accessible.
One of the things I haven't asked you is how well do you know the other council members that you would be sitting with? One of them who's just come in and you probably know is Chito Vela, but also Natasha Harper Madison.
Mhm.
And, you know, their districts sort of wrap around Mueller and District 9. So I think it's, my vision is that's a great combination to work on to get things done.
Yeah. Yeah. To date, I've worked with all of the city council members at least to an extent, and yeah, and I've worked to a great deal with Natasha Harper Madison and also with the current council member in District 9, Kathy Tovo. She's when we being the active transportation, the walking biking community have asked for things, she's generally said yes, and she's been supportive of that. I certainly don't agree with her on some other important issues, but I think she's been responsive, which I think is a great quality in a city council member. Um, and yeah, and Cheeto, I mean, I guess I'll go on the record. I supported him. I mean, I'm supporting Natasha in a re-election. I think Natasha's she's been one of my favorite. I mean, if not my current favorite city council member among them, she's among my favorite city council members currently. She, she gets things right and she speaks to them, and I think that's great. Um, and you can tell she cares. She has to hold back tears for sure. And Cheeto is, I appreciate that he's just starting up with action right away, especially in housing. And he gets it and he cares about his community. So those are excellent qualities. And then I'm not going to go through at this time because we probably don't have time, but go through all other council members. But I think they've all been great. And as far as like working with us on active transportation, and I think that's a key thing is what can you, as a city council member, what can you accomplish among a group of 10 other people? And that was one of the reasons why I chose to run, because it's not just simply a matter of like, am I going to show up and vote? Am I going to be the sixth vote? Am I going to be the ninth vote? I mean, that's a pretty low bar for choosing a city council member. And so I've worked in groups, in boards, for a long time, and I know that you have to give on things. You have to make your case. You have to be clear. You have to help other people understand it before you can get their vote. And there's going to be initiatives that I'll bring that these other council members have very little background knowledge in, and it's going to be vice versa, right? I mean, there's areas that I just did not know that much about, and I'm going to have to listen to them and be able to make a good decision on these things. And then we're going to have new elected officials too. So we don't know who those are going to be for sure. But ultimately, we'll just have to work with them.
Yeah, and it's. I think we've got a good future. Chito I think he just appointed Greg Anderson to the Planning Commission,
Yep.
which I think is a great move, personally. I greatly respect Greg and his work, and so it's.
I'm sorry, what?
I greatly respect Greg and his work.
Greg great respect. Yeah.
And so I'm looking forward to that. Chito, I think, is interesting, and this worries me about city elections. He ran for an unexpired term that was given up by the former council member who's gone on to run for Congress. And he got elected with less than 7% of the voters. Which I think, what did we do about that, Tom? How do we get people interested? How do we get people, because you're running for an office that has a lot of power. You're running for an office that represents, 1/10 of the population of, and to have 7% of those people step up and vote for their representation just scares me. I think we lose control of our democracy when that kind of thing happens. So your thoughts, I know you don't have a solution, but you might have some thoughts.
Well, I think there's a few things going on. I mean, yes, it was a special election, so that brought down the votes. And then District 9 does tend to have higher turnout than, I don't know about how it compares to all districts, but it's among the highest for turnout. And so I think the last I heard was we're expecting about 20% turnout, but I'm not sure, which is even not that great. So, I think that it's a wider effort. I think that people don't necessarily understand how much impact they have on their world with their city government. And I'll say two major things on this. So one of the things that has drawn me to city work is that I feel like what happens at the city is easily as impactful as what happens at the state and the national levels on certain issues. Granted, there's some issues that are absolutely going to be state and federal issues, and that's how it works. But what I've found is that cities across the country learn from other cities. And so if we find a solution in Austin, such as our green building program, which we essentially developed, Austin was pretty much the first on that. It's now copied in other cities, and that's had a huge impact regardless of what gets passed in Congress. So I actually feel like in some ways, we see stalemates at the federal level. I frankly don't, I'll just be frank, I don't agree with how state government, the positioning there of the majority. I think it's generally awful. I wouldn't say completely. I think there are good things that happen at the state level, but it's generally bad. So at the local level, we can accomplish so much. And I think that's a story I will continue to tell the people. I think we should also, as a city, kind of shifting into the other part of this, I think that we also have the opportunity to, as a city government, and I would say as a council office, but more as a city government, to actually talk about what the city does and connect people with why we spend resources on certain things, and tell the story on it, help people to see the value in what we're doing, and then also so that they can understand, and we can have community conversations about some things that might need to change over time. And I mean, the example, one thing that needs to change over time is how much housing we're allowed to build in the city. So, but that's just one example. There's other examples, whether it's our water utility or whatever. Just how do these things work, and help people to be able to understand. I think that the communications from the city government and that engagement on education on how the city works is an important part of the city functioning itself. And granted, most people are not going to just watch a YouTube video just because the city puts it out. So it's tricky, right? But I think a big part of it is making sure those resources, those communication, educational resources are available to the community leaders, whether they're neighborhood associations or whatnot, so that information can be spread out. And then that way, that helps to show people what the city can do and why their vote is impactful.
So let me ask you two questions before we finish up. First thing is, what one thing in District 9 brings you joy, something you really love, and it just makes your heart swell? And when you're in charge, what one thing will you change?
Sure. Well, I hope we have time for that. I can ask you a question, but so what's one thing that brings me joy? I mean, it's interesting that there's certainly multiple things, but I think one of the things that immediately, I don't know. I mean, I guess I would say actually Lady Bird Lake, being able to sit down at the shore, on the shoal at Shoal Creek is just it's a really precious place. When I think about where to live, and when I thought about where to live in Austin, I wanted to make sure that I was close enough to the river to be able to go there. I also like the urban. I also like being able to walk to places. So, as far as what I would do when in office, the one thing it's got to be on housing. I could talk about transportation as well, but I think on housing, I think the biggest thing is that we need to have our. Let me put it this way: if I'm in for 4 years or 8 years, but let's just even talk about the first term. If I'm in for 4 years and we don't see incredible progress on our housing supply meeting the demand, I didn't do my job. That's just going to be fundamental to and that's the thing. It's the housing supply meeting the demand. There's no other, the other ways to look at the other metrics don't add up. That's what it comes down to. And there's ways to measure whether housing supply is meeting demand, right? But no, it's not a matter of how tall the buildings are or how dense they are. It's a matter of the housing supply meeting the demand. My one question to you is just, I want to make sure if you had any follow up on the questions you asked previously, because I'm not the sort of person to dodge a question. So if I mistakenly did not cover something that you wanted me to ask or answer before, I'm happy to cover it. Or we can, I can come on again sometime.
Yeah, that I figured where you were coming from on transportation. The rest of the questions I didn't know. I really haven't had a chance, and your website so far is just a preliminary and doesn't talk about these things.
Yeah.
So this is
I'll get more information up in the next couple of
yeah,
weeks. So yeah.
this is going live, so it's been running live, but it will be on YouTube, and I will put out links to it so that people can get a chance to hear you voice uh, your position on things. Like
Yeah,
I said,
terrific.
I'm trying to do this with all the candidates for all offices that impact Miller, and it's I know it's very parochial, but okay, that's the world I live in, and it's what
Sure.
what I want our neighbors to hear, and it's that's why we're doing this. That's why we're spending the time doing this. But I really appreciate your time, Tom, and I greatly appreciate the work you've done for Austin. I've watched you sort of as a hero for lots of years and doing the work, particularly the Red Line Initiative. That got started, what, 10, 12, 14 years ago? And the whole vision of that was, I mean, we had all kind of stuff going on. We had people from all over the country coming here and looking at the Red Line and saying, what can we
Right.
do? And it died. It disappeared until Tom Wald steps up and says, okay, we're going to do something about this. And you are.
Yeah.
You're making a difference. You're creating change, which is, certainly what I'm looking for in a council member.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that, Ty. Yeah, and those who want to learn more, they can go to Red Line Parkway Initiative, the website. It's rlpi.org is a easy way to remember it. And yeah, to me, it touches on so many things, including the active transportation, the equity, the affordability, climate change action, economic development is a huge thing too, mobility in tight spaces, and then yes, it was one of those things where I think where it was a government. It's supposed to be a government initiative, and it needed extra help from the nonprofit community, the organizing community. So,
And that's the one that you talk about all the things it can do. And people say, well, it's just a trail from Austin to Leander. No, it's not. No, it's not. It's
right,
all of those things. It's all of those things you talked about because it makes a difference in the little short segments that people can get around. And
right.
very few people will ride from Austin to Leander. There
Oh,
will
right,
be
yeah.
some, but it's those pieces that we can get to. We can get to the train station. We can get to wherever. Those are the things that make that work. And so
Exactly.
yeah. So
Yeah,
thank
yeah.
you for
And we
that.
only have an hour here, so there's only so much to cover. But yeah, no, I could easily talk for even a half an hour just on Red Line Parkway
Yeah.
Initiative. But you did touch on it. It's more than just simply a trail, and there's the linear park aspect. There's the engagement with development, so people can work or shop or whatnot right along the trail. And it's also the other thing I'll say too. It's intended as another example in Austin of how we can create a vibrant and high quality of life in our city and then duplicate that. So this is one opportunity to do something like creating a high quality space for people to walk, bike, and take transit. But we can actually do this more in other parts of our city. And I'm not suggesting that's going to happen over 10 years, but it's an example that people can use for the next 10 years and the next 10 years and so on. And we just have to really know that we as people, as voters, but also just as the residents, we create our city. We have a lot of potential that we can choose to take up or not. And I'll my background in community organizing, I'll be clear too. We can only have 11 people on city council, but man, you can get so much done as a community organizer. If you have an issue that you care about, you can get so much done organizing your community and other people you live around as well. And I think that's really anyone who, and I'll just say anyone who's thinking of running for city council, I think that's actually really important. I think knowing how to actually uh, to be a community leader and advance something in your city, I think is really important background experience.
I want to diverge a little bit from Tom Wald. Yesterday we had an interview, and it'll be a podcast. It'll be audio with a lady who had come to Austin specifically to look at how Austin is being done with the transportation and all the rest of this, because the Walton Foundation in Northwest Arkansas is paying for the people in Northwest Arkansas to go out to the world and look at what's going on.
Yeah.
And they're coming to Austin to see what Austin is doing. They're coming to Mueller to see what Mueller is doing. And it's the same story. It's people can get things done. And she's in a small town in Arkansas that's had a lot of issues, and they're beginning to move forward. They're beginning to step out and do change. And it was just a great interview. It hadn't posted yet. It'll be up the next couple of days on the podcast. And our podcast is Celebrating Differences, which is a lot of fun. And but it talks about the same things you're talking about. It's how do you do this project and how do you make it fill multiple needs. So,
Right.
So what else, Tom? You got one more statement. What is it? What does it look like?
Oh man. Well, I do want to, if people are watching this and they go out to visit my website and we don't have much information up there, I just want to assure you that we are putting more things up there. And I do, over the next weeks and months, I'm going to be meeting with regular individuals. I'm also going to be meeting with prominent community leaders to help fill out my platform. So I certainly have ideas, just right now, and I could talk about them. I can write them down, but I also want to talk more closely with the people who have close experience on this, including Utah. I mean, what is that policy platform for the aging population?
Yeah.
And just getting into some detail. So I think that's the major thing. Is just that I want to really have that dialogue with people to put that out. And another thing too is I just I announced my candidacy just 3 weeks ago. So the other candidates have a little bit more of a head start. I think it's been 7 months, right? 6 months. So give me a little time and I'll get information up for y'all. And I believe that's important. So thanks for your patience.
So what's the cutoff date on filing? July 23rd, something like that? You don't care because you've already filed, but.
Well, no, actually, you can't file yet. You
Okay.
file a treasurer to announce to basically start your campaign, and then to file for office is in August. And I can't remember. I think the cutoff might be in August as well.
Okay. So that we've got a ways to go. We'll have lots of people who are throwing their hat in the ring and see what happens. Tom, I really do appreciate you taking the time to talk with us, and it's something that I've dreamed about, to be able to get more politically involved. I got Austin Cycling politically involved, and now it's time to get Mueller politically involved and see what we can do to make a difference.
Great.
Yeah. So, thank you, and I'll let you go now, and we will see you down the road.
Yeah, it's great talking with you, Ty. I'll see you around.
Take care.
Bye.
All right. So you're still on, Tom, but let me go back to my final. So that's a wrap. Please, if you've enjoyed this conversation, click the subscribe button below and ring the bell so we can let you know when we post another interview. And we will be back. So thank you for that. And